The wind roared like a wild beast, tearing through the valley. Ethan gripped the reins of his quarter horse, Titan, his heart pounding. The storm was worse than he had ever seen. Lightning slashed the sky, rain poured like a waterfall. Titan reared up, eyes wide with terror. He had been trying to warn Ethan for days. Restless hooves, nervous snorts, refusing to take the usual trail. Ethan thought it was just odd behavior. But now, standing on the edge of a collapsing bridge, Ethan realized the truth. Titan knew this was coming, and Ethan had ignored the signs. A deafening crack. The bridge began to break. Ethan's breath caught. Was it too late? Ethan had never believed in signs, fate, or superstitions. He was a man of logic, a rancher who built his life on hard work and routine. At 32 years old, with a strong, sun-worn face and sharp blue eyes, he had spent most of his life on horseback, riding across the endless plains of his family's ranch. And of all the horses he had ever owned, Titan was different. Titan wasn't just fast or strong. He was intelligent, almost eerily so. A deep chestnut coat gleamed under the sun, his mane flowing like fire in the wind. But what truly set him apart was his eyes, dark, sharp, and watchful, as if they could see beyond the present moment. Ethan had raised Titan from a foal, watching him grow into a fearless quarter horse with unmatched instincts. He wasn't just a riding partner, he was family. Titan understood Ethan in ways that even people couldn't. But Ethan had never imagined that his horse might understand something even he didn't. It started with small things, things that were easy to dismiss. One afternoon, Ethan was getting ready for a long ride. He saddled Titan like usual, but just as he was about to step into the stirrup, Titan snorted and pulled back, shaking his head. His muscles tensed beneath Ethan's hand, hooves shifting restlessly against the dirt. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, frowning. Titan had never refused a ride before. "What's wrong?" Titan's ears flicked forward, his gaze locked on the open field ahead. He refused to move. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "Fine, we'll wait a bit." Minutes later, a massive tree crashed down across the trail, right where they would have been riding. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. If Titan hadn't stopped him, they would have been crushed. "That's a weird coincidence," he muttered, rubbing Titan's neck. The horse stood calm now, as if he had known all along. But Ethan didn't think too much of it. A one-time fluke, nothing more. Over the next few weeks, Titan's strange behavior continued. One evening, Titan suddenly refused to walk past a certain fence. Ethan pulled the reins, trying to get him to move, but Titan stood firm, ears pinned back. The next morning, Ethan found the fence collapsed, a huge rattlesnake coiled underneath. Another time, Titan nudged Ethan away from a tool rack in the barn. Seconds before, a heavy iron hook came loose and crashed exactly where Ethan had been standing. Again and again, Titan tried to warn him, but Ethan always brushed it off. Horses didn't predict the future, right? Ethan had always believed in practicality, not premonitions. Horses had instincts, sure. They could sense things, weather changes, unfamiliar scents, maybe even danger. But predicting the future? That was ridiculous. At least, that's what he told himself. But Titan wasn't like other horses. It had been 3 weeks since the first incident, when Titan stopped Ethan from riding out onto the trail where a tree had fallen. Ethan had called it a fluke, a strange but lucky accident. But then there was the rattlesnake near the fence, the falling tool rack, the way Titan always seemed to know when something was wrong. And then came the night that Ethan would never forget. It started at sunset. The ranch was quiet, the sky painted in hues of deep orange and purple. Ethan had just finished his evening routine, checking the horses, securing the gates, and making sure everything was set for the night. But Titan was acting strange again. The moment Ethan stepped into the barn, he knew something was wrong. Titan was pacing in his stall, ears flicking back and forth, tail swishing in agitation. His deep brown eyes were wide, alert, almost frantic. Ethan frowned. "What's up with you now?" Titan let out a sharp snort, stomping his hoof against the wooden floor. Then he did something he had never done before. He turned his head and bit Ethan's jacket, pulling him back, hard. Ethan yanked his arm free. "Hey, what the hell's gotten into you?" Titan wasn't just restless. He was desperate. He pushed his body against the stall door, shaking it violently. His breathing was fast, nostrils flaring. Ethan had never seen him like this. A small shiver of unease crept up his spine. The barn was silent, except for Titan's ragged breathing and the sound of his hooves scraping against the floor. Then, in the distance, a low rumble. Ethan's head snapped up. At first he thought it was thunder, a storm rolling in maybe, but the skies were clear, no wind, no clouds. The sound came again, a deep, distant growl. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't thunder, and Titan knew it. Titan threw his head up, muscles tensed, eyes locked on the barn doors. Ethan walked outside, scanning the landscape, but he saw nothing, just the empty plains, stretching endlessly into the night. "What is it, boy?" Ethan murmured. Titan stomped his hoof again, hard. It was like he was saying, "We need to leave." "Now?" Ethan sighed. "You're being paranoid. There's nothing out here." Titan snorted sharply, his breath visible in the cold air. Ethan had work to do in the morning. He wasn't about to let a jittery horse ruin his night. "Enough, Titan. Go to sleep." He patted the horse's neck, ignoring the way Titan's muscles stayed stiff beneath his touch. Titan didn't calm down. Even as Ethan walked away, he could hear the horse's restless movements, the sound of hooves hitting the stall floor over and over again. Ethan shook his head, muttering to himself, "Damn horse is losing his mind." But deep down, a tiny voice whispered, "What if he's right?" The first scream came just after midnight. Ethan woke up instantly, sitting up in bed, his heart pounding. It was a sound unlike anything he had ever heard before. A deep, guttural roar, followed by the frantic neighing of horses. Titan. Ethan leaped out of bed, grabbing his rifle from the wall. He raced outside in nothing but his jeans and boots, the cold night air burning against his skin. The barn doors were wide open. Titan was already outside, rearing up, hooves slicing through the air, his nostrils flaring. The other horses were panicked, kicking at their stalls. And then Ethan saw it. On the far edge of the property, just beyond the wooden fence, two glowing eyes stared back at him. A mountain lion. It was massive, crouched low in the grass, its body nearly invisible in the shadows. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't seen a lion this big in years. They usually stayed away from the ranch. Why was it here now? And then he realized, Titan knew. Titan had tried to warn him. The horse's panic, the pacing, the way he had almost dragged Ethan out of the barn. He had sensed the predator before anyone else. Ethan slowly raised his rifle, but before he could take aim, the mountain lion moved. Fast. It leaped over the fence in a blur of muscle and claws, heading straight for the barn. Titan charged. Ethan had no time to think. The rifle was in his hands, but Titan was already acting. The quarter horse spun on his heels, slamming his hind legs into the ground as he kicked out with full force. His hooves connected with the mountain lion's ribs. A sickening crack echoed in the night. The lion yelped, stumbling back, momentarily stunned. Titan snorted furiously, his entire body rigid with adrenaline. Ethan fired a warning shot into the air. The lion, already injured, turned and bolted into the darkness. Silence fell over the ranch. The only sound was Titan's heavy breathing, his chest rising and falling as he stood tall, staring after the retreating predator. Ethan's hands were shaking. He looked at his horse, then at the fence, then back at Titan. And for the first time in his life, he truly believed it. Titan had known. He had tried to warn Ethan, and Ethan hadn't listened, until now. Ethan sat on the porch, his rifle resting beside him, his boots propped up on the wooden railing. The night air was cooler than usual, and the unsettling silence from earlier still lingered. Titan stood a few feet away, his ears twitching, his muscles still tense. He hadn't settled down, not after the mountain lion incident. Ethan exhaled slowly. He was trying to shake off the events of the night, but something inside him just wouldn't let go. He glanced over at Titan. The horse had saved him once tonight. And yet, even now, he still seemed restless. Ethan had learned one thing over the years. Horses settled when danger passed. But Titan? He was still acting like something was coming. A gust of wind rippled through the ranch. And then Ethan heard it. A low, distant rumble. It was deep, rolling across the hills, so faint that for a moment he thought he imagined it. Titan's head snapped up. His ears pointed straight toward the darkness beyond the fields. His entire body froze. Ethan straightened, gripping his rifle tighter. Then the sound came again, a distant, thunderous roar. But the skies were clear, no clouds, no lightning. This wasn't thunder. Titan stomped his hoof sharply, letting out a loud, piercing whinny that made Ethan's skin crawl. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Ethan pushed himself up from the chair. His pulse had picked up now, but his mind was still trying to rationalize it. He turned toward the barn, deciding to check on the horses again, just in case. But before he could take a step, he felt it. A vibration beneath his feet. His heart skipped a beat. The ground was shaking. It wasn't strong, not yet. Just a faint tremor, like a distant heartbeat pulsing through the earth. And then came the second rumble, louder this time. Titan reared up suddenly, kicking at the air. His eyes were wide, nostrils flaring as he let out another desperate whinny. Ethan's breath caught. The shaking grew stronger. Dirt trembled beneath his boots. The wooden fence posts rattled. In the distance, birds erupted from the trees, fleeing into the night. Ethan's gut twisted. Something big was coming. He took off running. Ethan ran straight for the barn, yanking open the doors. The other horses were already restless, stomping, neighing, trying to break free. But there was no mountain lion this time, no predators in sight. This was something else. His father's voice suddenly boomed from the house. "Ethan!" Ethan whipped around. His father stood on the porch, wearing his old ranch coat, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. And then the third rumble came. But this time, it wasn't just a sound. It was a force. The earth beneath them trembled violently, a deep, guttural roar shaking through the valley. Ethan's stomach dropped. His father's voice was urgent, almost frantic. "The dam!" But the words were drowned out by the sound of thunderous, rushing water. Ethan spun around toward the hills, and that's when he saw it. A massive black wave of water surging over the horizon, devouring everything in its path. A flash flood. Ethan's body locked up for half a second, but his instincts kicked in fast. He raced back into the barn, flinging open stall doors, shoving horses out. They bolted toward the hills, hooves kicking up dust. But Titan? Titan was already outside, waiting. The horse stood at the edge of the barn, his eyes locked on Ethan, shifting restlessly, but not running, waiting for him. Ethan ran for the house, nearly colliding into his father. His dad grabbed his arm. "We have to get to the hills. Now!" "The cattle?" Ethan gasped. "Leave them. If we don't go now, we're dead." A sharp explosion in the distance ripped through the night. Ethan's eyes snapped toward the horizon. The dam had completely collapsed. The wall of water was moving faster now, a dark, swirling mass of destruction, uprooting trees, carrying debris. It was going to swallow the ranch whole. Ethan's father ran for the truck, but Ethan turned toward Titan. His gut screamed at him. The truck wouldn't make it, not with the rough terrain, the rising water. But Titan? Titan could run faster than any vehicle in the valley. Titan was his only chance. Ethan's father revved the truck engine. "Ethan, get in!" But Ethan had already made his decision. He grabbed Titan's reins, vaulting into the saddle in one smooth motion. The horse tensed beneath him, muscles coiled like a spring. Ethan's father's voice was desperate. "You won't make it on horseback. The water's too fast." Ethan gritted his teeth, gripping Titan's mane. "Then we better be faster." And with that, he dug his heels into Titan's sides. "Run, boy! Run like hell!" Titan launched forward. The ground shook beneath them. Behind them, the flood devoured the ranch. And ahead, a desperate race against death. Titan launched forward, his powerful legs digging into the earth, hooves pounding like rolling thunder. Ethan gripped the reins tight, his body leaning low over the horse's neck. The wind whipped against his face, but he barely felt it. His focus was locked on one thing only: the rising hills ahead. Behind them, the flood was coming fast, a roaring monster of water, devouring everything in its path. Fences ripped from the ground, massive tree trunks tossed like matchsticks, the barn crushed in seconds. Titan snorted sharply, his ears pinned back. He knew what was behind them, and he was running like his life depended on it. Because it did. Ethan's heart pounded, his pulse slamming against his ribs. They had to stay ahead of the water, but the terrain wasn't easy. The soft ground was turning into slick, sinking mud, slowing them down. Titan skidded, hooves struggling for grip. "Come on, boy," Ethan urged, tightening his grip. "We can do this." Titan pushed forward, his muscles straining, his breath coming in sharp, labored bursts. He leaped over a fallen tree, barely clearing it before the water smashed into it, tearing it away. Ethan glanced back, immediately regretting it. The flood was closer than he thought. It wasn't just water anymore. It was a churning black wave of destruction. Debris, uprooted trees, broken fences, even chunks of the barn. And it was gaining on them. Up ahead, the ground narrowed into a steep pass. Rocky cliffs on one side, a deep, dry ravine on the other. Ethan cursed under his breath. The only way out was through. But the pass was dangerous. The trail was uneven, full of loose rocks. And if Titan lost his footing, Ethan shook the thought away. "You got this, boy," he muttered. Titan charged forward, his body surging with raw power. The flood was seconds behind them now, the deafening roar of water so close Ethan could feel the vibrations in his bones. Titan jumped over a fallen log. Crack! The ground beneath them gave way. Titan's front hooves slipped, his body tilting dangerously forward. Ethan felt his stomach drop as the horse's legs scrambled for footing. For a split second, it felt like they were going down, straight into the ravine. Ethan yanked the reins, shifting his weight back, his body moving in sync with Titan's. Titan let out a furious snort, his muscles coiling with pure determination. With a powerful kick, he launched forward, barely escaping the collapsing ground behind them. The flood smashed through the pass, turning it into a swirling vortex of debris and chaos. They had made it, but the worst wasn't over yet. The hill was in sight, their only chance of survival. But the path leading up was steep and slippery. Rain from earlier had turned the dirt into a slick, muddy mess. Ethan's heart clenched. Titan had to make it up. If he didn't, they were done for. Titan charged up the incline, his hooves kicking up dirt and mud. Halfway up, the ground gave out beneath them. Titan slipped. Ethan lurched forward, gripping the horse's mane to keep from falling off. Titan fought for grip, his hooves sliding, muscles trembling under the strain. The flood was right below them now, slamming against the base of the hill. If Titan couldn't make it up, Ethan made a split-second decision. He threw himself off the saddle, landing hard on the muddy slope beside Titan. With everything he had, he grabbed Titan's reins and pulled. "Come on, boy! You can do this!" Titan's eyes locked onto Ethan's, and then he dug in. With one final mighty push, he clawed his way up the hill. Ethan scrambled after him, his arms burning, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The moment they reached the top, the flood swallowed the land beneath them. They had escaped, barely. Ethan and Titan stood at the edge of the cliff, their bodies heaving with exhaustion. Below them, the ranch was gone, the barn, the fields, the fences, all of it. The land Ethan had grown up on, worked on, built his life around, wiped away in seconds. His hands shook, his chest felt tight. He had lost everything, except Titan. The horse stood beside him, mud-covered, drenched, exhausted, but alive. Ethan reached out, running a hand over Titan's neck. His muscles were still quivering, his breath still ragged. But in those deep, dark eyes, there was no fear, just understanding. Titan had known. From the very beginning, Titan had tried to warn him. And Ethan? He had almost ignored him. The first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the ruined land below. Ethan let out a slow, shaky breath. He wasn't sure what came next. The ranch was gone, and he had no idea how to rebuild. But one thing was certain. From now on, whenever Titan sensed something, Ethan would listen. Because this time, Titan hadn't just saved him once. He had saved him twice. And Ethan would never doubt him again. The first light of dawn broke over the hills, casting long golden shadows across the valley. Ethan stood in silence, his breath still unsteady, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline. His entire world, everything he had ever known, was gone. The ranch, the barn, the home he had grown up in, all of it swept away. The land that had once been alive with the sounds of horses, cattle, and the crackling of firewood on a cold evening was now nothing but mud and debris. Ethan swallowed hard. His chest felt tight, like a weight pressing down on him. He had spent his entire life building something here, working from sunrise to sunset, never thinking for a second that it could all disappear overnight. And yet, through the devastation, he wasn't alone. Titan was still there. The quarter horse stood beside him, his chestnut coat covered in dried mud, his breath still heavy from the escape. But in his dark, knowing eyes, there was no fear, no panic, just understanding. Titan had felt it coming. He had tried to warn Ethan over and over again, and Ethan had ignored him, until it was almost too late. Ethan let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening in Titan's mane. His hands were rough, calloused from years of ranch work, but now they trembled slightly as they ran over the horse's neck. For years, he had seen Titan as just a horse. A great one, sure, fast, strong, intelligent. But now, Ethan knew better. Titan was more than just a horse. He was his guardian, his partner, his savior. And for the first time in his life, Ethan truly understood what that meant. A question clawed at the back of Ethan's mind. Why him? Why had he made it out alive when so many others wouldn't have? He should have drowned in that flood. If he had ignored Titan's warnings for even a few minutes longer, if he had taken the truck instead of the horse, if he had made even one wrong move, he would be dead. Titan had saved him, not once, twice. And maybe that wasn't just luck. Maybe Titan had been trying to tell him something all along, something bigger, something that Ethan had been too stubborn to see, until now. Ethan looked down at Titan, his throat tightening. The sun had risen a little higher now, its warm light spilling over the horse's mud-covered body. Titan flicked his ears, turning his head slightly to look at him. Ethan let out a short breath, his lips pressing into a tight line. And then, for the first time in years, he spoke to Titan not as an animal, but as an equal. "You knew, didn't you?" His voice was hoarse, raw with exhaustion and emotion. "You saw it coming." Titan didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react like a normal horse would. He just stood there, staring into Ethan's eyes, as if he had been waiting for Ethan to understand all along. Ethan exhaled sharply, looking away. His hands tightened into fists before he finally relaxed, running them over Titan's mane again. "I won't ignore you again," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Not ever." And this time, he meant it. The flood had taken everything, but it had also left something behind. A lesson, a bond, a reminder that some connections go beyond words. Ethan didn't know what came next. He had no ranch, no home, no clear path forward. But he had Titan, and that was enough. Because from this moment on, whenever Titan sensed something, whenever he acted restless or uneasy, whenever he tried to warn him of something unseen, Ethan would listen. Some bonds go beyond words. Some warnings should never be ignored. Ethan learned that the hard way. But what about you? How often do we ignore the signs right in front of us? A gut feeling, a moment of hesitation, that small voice in the back of our minds telling us something isn't right. Maybe, just maybe, it's trying to warn us. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this lesson, and subscribe for more incredible stories that make you think, feel, and believe. Because sometimes the smallest signs save lives.